Good afternoon and welcome to Securing the Network Connected Devices Fueling Your Digital Transformation, a Health System CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Forescout. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name's Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Nice way to view the screen. Click in the top center, get it in side-by-side mode. Then you can adjust the divider to get the slides in the video boxes the size you want them, and it should say speaker view in the top right-hand corner. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Stephen Dunkle, CISO with the Geisinger Health System, John Jeffries, CISO with UT Medical Center, and Tamer Baker, VP of Global Healthcare with Forescout Technologies. So let's jump right in. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about. Steve, let's start off with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure. I'm Steve Dunkle, Chief Information Security Officer with Geisinger. Geisinger is located in central Pennsylvania with 12 hospital systems. In addition, we have a health plan, School of Medicine, research arm, and we also have a what's known as KeyHigh, which is a health information exchange, as well as a life flight unit. I think we have 9 helicopters at this time, and a workforce of about 30,000. Geisinger places a priority on innovation and patient care.
Very good, Steve. Thank you. John?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Jeffries. I'm the Information Security Director for University of Tennessee Medical Center. We have a hospital that has 685 beds located in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're a magnet certified and the only level 1 trauma center in our area. We specialize in regional transplant, comprehensive stroke and cardiac center. We have 7 centers of excellence, and we support 21 counties in East Tennessee.
Very good, John. Thank you. Tamer?
Everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm Tamer here at Forescout. Forescout is really a cybersecurity company that helps protect these organizations like Steve and John's that we're just discussing today. What we do is we provide a complete discovery of all assets, both in the IT as well as the IoMT and everything in between, the IoT, OT, and all those other devices on the network. Not only are we discovering them all, but we help our customers do an assessment of all of these devices, including the unagentable headless types of devices, and help govern your network by controlling everything that's going on the network so that we make things actionable. We actually can communicate with all the network infrastructure as well as all the devices to really help secure and automate a lot of the processes that are involved with security here in these organizations.
Very good. All right, let's jump right into it. John, let's start with you. Describe the proliferation of IoMT devices in health systems and how it has impacted security.
Well, for us, the challenge has been getting an accurate inventory across the hospital of devices that we're trying to manage. And so with that inventory, sometimes you have to, worry about the patching, and so many devices are smart IoT, and they need to connect to the our service. And so, there's several vendors that provide insight into that area. One of the things that we did was change the way we purchase our services and our solutions that get brought into the hospital. And we worked with our purchasing department, and now we get involved from an IT and IT security perspective from the beginning and vet these services to make sure that they are meet our minimum requirements.
Okay, very good. Tamer?
Yeah, so as a vendor, that's one of the things that we specialize in, is just ensuring that with this proliferation that we've uncovered and discovered over the last few years, that's actually what's fueled a lot of our growth. Is the majority of these networks now are those smart devices that are not manageable. So in a typical hospital system, only 30% of things that show up online, or less even in some cases, can be agentable, manageable by traditional IT security means. So that's been a big challenge that we've seen a lot of people struggle with, that we can help, with these challenges by understanding everything that's connected. One of the big things that I'll say a takeaway with the discovery and understanding that asset inventory that Forescout specifically does is we have 24 methods that we use to help discover everything and assess everything that's on the network versus relying on only 1 or 2 methods of discovery or assessment. So that way it's very comprehensive without the blind spots.
Let's talk a little bit about the blind spots, Tamer. So you're talking about making sure you've got 24 methods to make sure you discover everything on the network. Are you saying that in general that there's a lower percentage than 100% that people are finding and you get it much closer to 100? Is that it? It's percentages. If you only use a few methods, you maybe get to 80%, but you really need to be closer to 100. What is the thinking there?
Yeah, the reason why there are the blind spots today in most of these organizations is because if you're leveraging on an agent-based solution, there's going to be blind spots there because they can't communicate everywhere. Agents go bump in the night and die for whatever reason. If you're leveraging a scanning solution, you can't scan all of your network. Some is too sensitive to scan. Your network's very transient now, especially during the pandemic. So you're going to have blind spots there. If you're leveraging something like span traffic only, well, you can't always span the entire network of every device and every flow communicating to and from. So you're going to have a lot of trouble and blind spots there as well. So we do all of those as well as many, many other methods, because what we found is when we go into these organizations, in our typical customer base, it's about 30% more devices that we discover than they imagined that they would have. In a health system space, that percentage is almost 50% on average more than what they thought they had on the network. So it's not just a small gap in what you think you have versus what we've discovered. It's a fairly significant gap.
Wow. Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, truly there are some amazing things that are being done with these type of devices. And I mean, I'm awestruck by some of the capabilities, both from a service provider, meaning healthcare, but also as a patient. And when we look at with COVID certainly brought this on, but I think we were headed that way anyway, with the more and more telehealth and working with patients, these devices add a lot more information and capabilities for the provider when they're talking with a patient. Obviously, I don't worry about it quite as much if it's not network connected, but we all know the world has changed, and these devices can be connected a multitude of different ways, including the cellular connection. And so it does open the door from a security perspective. And I fully agree with John and Tamer, the point about device asset management and keeping track of all these, which is a monumental task if you have a large number of them, some of which may be actually patient owned, but they still connect into the healthcare system. So kind of in conclusion on this, I've landed at the spot that we've always been a believer in security in depth. But I think in this world, security in depth is absolutely critical, because there is not one single solution or even a couple that's the silver bullet, so to speak. And so looking at the network layer with tools and technologies, and then fundamental discipline, and from an IT perspective, the concept of change management and patch management, all of these things have to fit together to adequately protect these devices. And it is, in today's world, a very ongoing and strenuous task.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. John, you want to talk a little bit about that concept of blind spots? You mentioned, and we'll get into this a little more later, the idea of centralizing purchasing to make sure things aren't bought at a departmental level and they don't sort of sneak in and become a blind spot. But any more thoughts around that concept of blind spots?
Well, that's not 100% a cure-all, because sometimes we've discovered that we've had vendors come in and put devices on our unsecure network, and so that way it's not on our secure network, and so we really don't know these devices are on there, and they're possibly transmitting PHI, to other locations, and so we have to be very, very careful with that. I think we haven't determined a concrete solution to help us do this, but we've demoed several of them, and it was eye-opening to see the amount of devices that were on our network. We were really taken back by that, and especially we discovered some that were on our unsecure network, and so we had to immediately go out and remediate that. But I think that, with a large organization, it's really hard to keep your finger on that pulse all the time. And you need a solution to be able to see into that area.
Right. And to see the things that get put on, get purchased, get attached to the network without you knowing about it, you need some mechanism for finding them. And that's what Tamer's
Absolutely.
talking about, those technologies that help
absolutely.
you do that. And he's talking about doing it in a very thorough way.
Right.
And I guess there are methodologies or ways that are less thorough where you're really not getting a complete picture. Tamer, how complete a picture do you think you can get with those two other methods? I mean, do you feel like you get 100%, or is that just not possible? Is that
No, legal will always say, well, you can never claim 100%, but I'll tell you, it's 100%. I mean, if you're employing all the methods, you're not going to have the blind spots, unless you're really falling down on, not including parts of your network yourself for some reason. You can really get that complete picture. But I want to add to it, it's not just the discovery of these things, right? Because discovery alone isn't enough. Having another widget is not enough. Having another dashboard is not enough. It's got to be actionable. It's got to be things that you can actually do something with, and do something with it and do something about it. And even more importantly, automate it. So to Steve's point, when you were talking about the multi-vendor approach, it's 100% a multi-vendor approach, this security practice that we're talking about here. But what makes it more powerful is when you automate the processes between all these vendors to make sure that these flow naturally across the different systems there.
And Timur, are we talking about like a snapshot in time where you need to update it at certain intervals, or is it once you get these technologies in place, you get continuous monitoring and alerting of anything else that comes on the network?
It has to be continuous in real time, because if you're doing snapshots, the moment the snapshot is done, your network's already changed 5 minutes later. So it's got to be a continuously monitoring effort.
All right, very good. Let's go to our next question. Steve, let's start with you. How are you securing your unagentable IoMT devices? How are you testing that security? How are you handling patch management, which you touched on before? And we know there can be challenges with these medical devices. Either there aren't patches, or somehow the patches are in conflict with the manufacturer or the warranty, and these type of things. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, and I stress that word because I do see it as a journey. In some ways, this is new technology. It's different. In other ways, it reminds me, dating myself somewhat, but of the older days in IT, where we were learning how to build controls in the environment. And a lot of those traditional controls still apply, although they may not be applied the same way. So what we're doing, obviously segmentation at a network level, I believe is an important one. Things like vulnerability assessment, but as a point was made earlier, you sure need to be careful about doing vulnerability assessment on something that potentially could be connected to a patient or obviously business critical. So coming up with a way to vulnerability test safely, i.e. having devices offline in a lab or something, and not testing all of them, but maybe a subset or whatever. I also feel strongly that, at least for now, the answer here is at the network layer. with the things we're talking about. You know, the device discovery, critical part, the threat detection, and then a third part that we're seeing that was sort of unanticipated from a security standpoint is from a data analytics. We have the clinical side very interested in what we're seeing with these devices. For example, why is a certain device not getting used as much as other devices the same kind being put into use? Is there something wrong with that device, or is there something about the other device that's more desirable as far as function that the clinicians are using it for that purpose? So we're on a journey to basically, I keep bringing it up, but design, security design in depth. Can we put around these devices to protect them, including questioning at times, does it really need to be network connected? And there are cases where they actually do not, at least in our business. And then the physical security, beginning to do some work with locking down the USB ports. There's some good solutions out there arising on that. So it's a host of solutions. It's nothing I could cover, you know, without getting into a lot of detail. There is no, as I said earlier, a silver bullet for this in my mind at this time.
Right, right. John?
I have to agree with Steve. You know, we use published FDA vulnerability recall tools to compare against our inventory list. And we also work with our different departments, biomed and our sysops team, and try to ensure that, you know, these devices are up to date and to the best of our ability. Sometimes the devices are managed by vendors that, you know, we have to work with and possibly replace. So it's a challenge. It's a full-time job just trying to get your head wrapped around all these devices and keep them, you know, patched and you know, in a place of being safe.
You said they're managed by vendors. What do you mean by that?
Well, we have a lot of vendors that bring devices in that we work with, and, you know, maybe the operating room or something that they will, you know, have certain devices that come in and they, you know, the doctors use them for, you know, recording, or I don't know. There's a several different things that, you know, come to mind. But there's a lot of devices out there that connect to the, you know, our network that I guess you just wouldn't imagine, you know.
Right. Yep. Very good. Tamer?
Yeah, so I have a couple of things that I was wanting to talk about as I hear you guys speak. We're focused right now on the IoMT devices in this discussion right here, but the real element that I want to call out is that if we're just looking at securing IoMT, when we look at all the different threats that are actually attacking us today in the hospital system world or any HDO world, we're finding that these threats and these attacks are coming in outside the IoMT space and then moving laterally to it, right? So these threats come in from different angles, different spots. It could be an IP camera, it could be somebody clicking a link on their, you know, nurse's laptop, whatever it may be, but they move laterally and hit the IoMT devices at some point. Because what we're finding is that, for example, ransomware isn't just about data encryption anymore. They're also taking it to multiple stages where they're going to encrypt your data, DDoS your health systems, the actual medical IoT devices, right? And bring those systems down to encourage you to pay that ransom more. And then also exfilling data, which is another big component of what we're doing to try and protect that data. So when we consider that bigger picture of things, if I'm just laser focusing on IoMT only, that's already, by the time that attack reaches that, I'm already at step 7 in that attack, far too late. So we provide that bigger picture across both the IT traditional and IoMT in that unified picture view for you. And we do offer, to your earlier point, Steve, the vulnerability assessment can come without actually having to scan it, right? Because we can match the exact vendor firmware model to the CVEs that those have. So you can do it in a passive way that's safe. One of the 24 methods that we talk about, right, is a passive method that we need to handle there. And we all understand, to your point, John, patch management is not always the answer, right? Many times you're never going to get something patched because it's just end of life. And we have to have legacy stuff on these networks. It's just the nature of business, right? Other times you can't control the patch management and you're waiting months for another vendor to come in. So this is where, to your point, Steve, now is you wrap a bubble wrap around these things. You put them in a segment where they can't be exploited. Yeah, maybe it's vulnerable, but there's no risk to that vulnerability if it can't be exploited. And that's where we can also come in and do the segmentation piece, actively be able to segment them, especially when things are getting added to your network without you knowing about it. We're still able to do that segmentation and put them in the right buckets there.
Well, how do you get it in the right bucket if you don't know about it? Right? I mean, you have to know it exists and then put it in the bucket. So what are your thoughts there, Tamer?
Yeah, so when it comes to that, there's two things that we provide. First and foremost, we have to do this in a way that's non-disruptive, because we can't disrupt patient care. We can't disrupt the business in any way, shape, or form. So what we offer is the ability to see all the traffic flows of how things are communicating today with all these different types of devices. And once we've mapped out, well, these device types speak to these other device types, or these device types go into my data center, or some of them have to communicate to the internet, or whatever it may be. We show you all the traffic flows and give you the ability to write segmentation rules and simulate them as if you were going to turn them on. And then you can watch it for a month. And as new devices get joined, you can see if there's any violations to the way that you would have segmented these things. And if not, then we can turn on the actual controls right within the same platform and be able to do the segmentation and continuously monitor that. But more often what we find is that all these devices that are on your networks that we're talking about, the communication's undocumented. So you may document and write in there how things should communicate, and you write your policies, and we're going to see all the violations, like, why is it communicating this way? And then you realize it's just undocumented communication that's supposed to happen. But this way we can clean all that up before you cause any disruption. But that way it's also continuously monitored, Anthony, to your question is, how do you do it if you don't know about it? Well, first we discover it as soon as it connects to the network. We assess it to understand exactly what that is. And then we drop it in the right bucket based off of the rules that we've done all this planning for. We just make the planning easier because we give you all the information up front instead of you trying to create the policies and understanding how to write those segmentation rules.
Steve, thoughts?
Yeah, I sitting here listening, Tamer, and nodding my head. I really like his point and really agree with the idea. Having taken this journey, there's a lot of emphasis about, there's some very good, solid threat detection tools specific to IoMT on the market. Excellent products. But I agree with Tamer from the standpoint of, I'm concerned about the enterprise as a whole. And I want the big picture, what's going on there. And so the way we're approaching it is more of enterprise from a threat detection perspective, device or IoMT environment specific to a device identification, and call it a configuration management perspective and analytics data. So really we get the best of two worlds. There's a little bit more cost with it, but the tools designed for IoMT specifically are very good at identifying devices and a lot of information about those devices. But we, again, look from a threat perspective. I want to know lateral movement as it occurs. As Tamer said, is it moving from a server into an IoMT segment? So that's kind of how we've approached it. I don't like the idea of having a specific solution in an IoMT environment relative to network threat. That's merely my opinion, but I do agree with his thoughts.
John, it sounds like the idea here is you get lost, you can't see the forest for the trees type thing. Then we don't want to do that because
Right.
there's a lot of talk around IoMT medical devices. And I guess the danger is just zeroing in on that, perhaps to the exclusion of a bigger picture, especially at the CISO level. What are your
Right.
thoughts?
Absolutely. It's a portion of what we do every day. And so you have to, work with, third parties, I think, to be able to leverage the solutions and be able to use those solutions in a manner that is efficient with your time and your team's time. we have to create these relationships. And, I think for us, we've been on this journey as has been mentioned before for about a year and a half now, maybe 2 years, trying to discover the best solution that we're going to go with. And it's been a very enlightening journey to see the devices that are on the network, like I said earlier, on the secure network and also on the unsecure network, and just to get a pulse of what's going on. It's mind-boggling, I think. And taking that information back to the C-suite and sharing with them, it was really eye-opening, and that it helps with providing them real-life examples to help us fund projects like that. These solutions aren't very cheap, and so you have to. For us, I know we have to plan for those in advance, and so we have to go through and do our due diligence to research and discover what is going to be the best for our environment.
Steve, what's the level of support these days for controls and the things you're trying to do? I know you try to not get in the way, let's say, of operations and patient care and all that. There's sometimes you have to you have to create processes that perhaps slow people down a little bit. I would imagine the level of support is pretty high for you doing what you need to do, and ransomware in a sense has helped that. It's brought things up many levels. But what's the appetite for letting you do what you need to do these days?
Well, it's an interesting thought. It's twofold. One is, yes, we get more support, a lot more nodding of heads in the boardroom and senior leadership. And when I say that, it's not just about money, but yes, I understand what you're saying. I understand the risk much better than I did. On the other side of that is, well, you're security people, and it's your job to figure these things out because we still have to move fast. Innovation's critical. And so, again, it's, yes, you made us aware of the risk. We really appreciate that. Thank you. Now your job is to help address that. What's your plan? And so in some ways it's helped, in some ways it's raised the stress level a bit.
Right, because we're going forward. We're just being courteous and telling you that you need to make sure this stuff is secure. Now we'll talk to you later and get it done.
We understand if you need money, we sort of get that, but yes, get it done. Nothing's changed in that regard.
Right. John, what are your thoughts?
I agree 100%. I have the full support of my board, and it's exciting, but we have to plan. We have to budget things, and so it's my job to give them relevant information and work with the constraints we're under to plan for major purchases like this.
And Tamer, you talk to a lot of customers, potential customers. When you speak to the CISOs at healthcare organizations, what do you hear as some of the main things they're struggling with? Is it a leadership level stuff, dealing with the board, dealing with the rest of the getting buy-in, or is it more of the technical stuff of actually rolling things out and getting these processes in place?
I'd say it's both, but I would add one more thing too, and that third thing that I see is working with those biomed clinical teams as well. That's another, in some places, adversarial type of world, in other places not so much, thankfully, because traditionally and historically they got to do whatever they wanted, but now because of all the increased attacks and threats and risks, now they've got to put a security hat on, and quite often they're not used to that, and they're not used to having instead of buying what they want when they want, doing what they want with it, now they have to either themselves secure it or have John or Steve on breathing down the necks on how they're going to secure it for them. So that's another challenge that I've seen that's becoming a lot more proliferate. Some of the things that I've seen, though, if we elevate the conversations to what you guys were speaking to earlier, to the board level conversations or even CFO level conversations, what we've found also worked for us, us being the vendor, right, is that we found customers of ours by employing our technology across the entire enterprise and actually reducing the risk and making that threat landscape smaller, because again, it's not just a widget and a dashboard, it actually does the actions too. They've lowered their cybersecurity insurance premiums by more than what it costs us annually, for example. So we've seen other ways that you can have conversations with board and CFO types to get the funding you need by demonstrating, look, we can lower insurance premiums on our cyber insurance if you've got it. We can also do what we talked about earlier with Steve, which is some of the automation between these tools, saving those getting ROI on the manpower or human capital hours that you're spending. We're all short staffed, and this is another way to alleviate the short staff pains by implementing some of this automation. So these are some of the conversations that I have at the higher levels that we're talking about today.
All right, very good. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about inventory, which was just touched on. Again, one of the greatest challenges is obtaining and maintaining accurate inventory. What is your advice on that? So Tamer talked about his solutions that are constantly scanning the network, looking for the devices, and then giving you automated solutions to maybe some AI to do things around that. And then let's talk a little bit more about the shadow or gray IT. Steve, you talked about, we talked about the concept of not slowing people down, but if we're centralizing purchasing and we're taking that power away from certain departments, nobody likes that. Nobody likes, well, I used to be able to just buy it. And now it's, well, once it hits the department where the spend gets released, they say, no, I'm sorry, you need sign off from security on this. And they say, what? So they're not happy. Is that one of the areas where, unfortunately, security does need to put a speed bump on someone's processes, and then you have to work through any complaints that come back about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a worry, but we've done a lot of, speaking of technology solutions. And to me, part of the security and design involves process, and I would call it governance or
Mm-hmm.
organizational discipline. And we often carry the torch, so to speak, that this isn't about just an information breach or a potential delay of a service. This can be a patient safety concern. And that people begin to understand that's critical. And so, for example, not to say, it happens, although it probably does. Someone just brings a device in and plugs it into the network. You're putting the organization at risk. The same as you would in the physical world if you shut off a fire detection system in a building. And that's part of the discipline we have is, in the culture, you just don't do things like that because you're putting patients at risk. And that, again, is part of patient care, certainly. So there's a discipline side to that, but I also agree that you can't be naive and say just a policy is going to save you. I think, as Tamer and John pointed out, we have to be looking at these technologies. And to the point earlier, it doesn't change daily. As the point was made, it changes continuous.
Mm-hmm.
And you're never going to get there without automation. So
That's
that's
great.
my 2 cents at it.
That's worth every penny you gave me with that 2 cents. No, that was good. That was really good. See, John, what are your thoughts?
I have two thoughts on that. One of the things that I implemented, several years ago was I created a email distribution list, and also we use Workplace, and we send out weekly security updates. And this is just a 5, topics, 5 highlights of what's going on out in the world right now dealing with cybersecurity, and whether it be a breach from some kind of a ransomware or whatever. And so I send that out weekly to our, this distribution list. And so what I try to do is keep this in the forefront of everyone's mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm continually adding people to my list to communicate with. So in turn, what happens, they see that and they read it, and it's a very short blurb about what's going on, and they keep it in their mind. And so when things come up, and they start wondering about technology and wondering about ransomware. I hope that it helps them to when we start coming to them and saying, hey, we need to do a security review on this particular solution you're requesting to purchase, then they understand that there's a reason behind it, because they've already seen so many different articles and news articles about what's going on out at other places. And so, for us, that security review has been just so critical to changing our culture. And at first it was a little bit difficult when we rolled it out, but now it's just normal daily business that we do, and so we don't get as much resistance now as we used to. And I think that, coupled with good communication and working with our different internal components, it has been a good relationship. It's built a good relationship for the security team, and we've had good success with it at our hospital.
Some great points, Tamer, and it made me think that no matter how much money you spend on technology, no matter what tools, no matter any systems, you can't overcome a bad security culture, right?
Right.
So if you have a bad culture, meaning that people don't care because you haven't told them why they should care,
Right.
right? You haven't communicated that. You can't overcome that. You will
Right.
lose, right? If
Right.
people are clicking on everything and plugging stuff in whenever they want and buying stuff left and right, and the news, we hear about these tragedies in the news. There's one hospital being sued about a baby that died. They
Right.
thought the care was not optimal because the systems were down due to a ransomware event. We don't know how that'll play out, but CISOs and security people can, I hate to use the word, but they can leverage that to try and communicate the seriousness, as Steve, as you mentioned, patient care. Well, you're
Right.
just saying it because you're in security. No, look at this lawsuit. Look what's going on. So you
Right.
need to care. If you get people to care and you put in all the tools and defense in depth and all the other things, then you got a shot. Does that make sense?
It's worked for us very well, and we've had good success with it.
That's brilliant, John. I was going to ask you about how you transitioned to be able to do that, and you answered it before I asked. But I think it's, if you look at it just like any other advertising and marketing campaigns, we get hit with all day, every day, with people trying to advertise their soda products or whatever it is. You're doing the same thing internally. That's the thing
Right.
that came to my mind. Is immediately it's like a repetitive, throw it in your face every single day, and your users will, or the other teams will start understanding why you're here doing your job, is to
Right.
prevent that poor little girl from dying from a ransomware attack.
Right.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Steve, do you ever do you or do you think any CISOs benefit from going down to speak to marketing and saying, "Hey, you guys do marketing. How about give me some advice on internally marketing what we need to do from a security point of view to our organization?"
Well, that's a good question. It opens up a bit of a box from my perspective. A couple years ago, I did bring on what I titled a cyber communication specialist. And this individual had very little cyber expertise, but he definitely had a lot of experience in marketing and communications. And he is our full-time communications and marketing person on staff. And he certainly earns his money. He has helped us tremendously in getting the word out. He's added an element of fun within the organization to cybersecurity, which I give him a lot of credit for. And he has basically become our front man, our liaison to the rest of the enterprise. So that's been a good investment, kind of an experiment on my part, but it really paid off. So short answer is yes, it's critical. Yeah, but security is a business, just like anything else. You need a marketing division.
Yeah, you got to sell it. You need cooperation, right?
Yep.
I
Go
think
ahead, Tamer.
here's my Ask the Co-panelist, I guess, real quick.
Oh, look, you look at you, and I just changed the slide.
I mean, Steve, if this guy knows how to make cybersecurity fun, I kind of want to connect offline to understand the types of things that he can do to help other organizations, because I think what he's doing is making cybersecurity fun to understand cybersecurity for the entire hospital organization, I'm assuming, meaning like everybody that works there is responsible for security. We all know this. Everybody can click an email link, which will bring down the entire organization. So if you've got a nice way that you're able to educate your or well, I'll call it customers. It's the hospital system.
Absolutely.
Everybody on your network is your customer,
Yeah,
and you're getting
absolutely.
them on board with being smart-minded. I think that's a great strategy that would be worth sharing with your peers. And I'd be happy to take that message to the folks that I speak with as well. So
Yeah, love to talk about it. We're just finishing up on our fishing derby, fishing with a PH, which has been going on for the month. And at the end, someone's going to win a nice fishing pole and tackle and things like that. So that's one example. It's fun.
I just want to clarify why I laughed, because we were talking about actual fishing before the webinar started. So we got to keep it straight. All right, very good. So Tamer asked his question, and let's go to our next Ask a Co-panelist. John, do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Can I step back and share one experience I have with taking care of our customers internally? We do we call them rounds. And so several people at the hospital get together and they go through different parts of the hospital on a schedule. And throughout the year, they visit locations twice a year, and they help prepare the units for Joint Commission. And so when we stood up our security team, we asked if we could join that rounds and go and visit the internal facility as well as the offsite locations. And so what that did, that gave us a opportunity to go into the offices where everyone is working, at least twice a year, and meet with them and talk to them. And so we get a few minutes to tell them about what we're doing in security, and it gives them a name with a face when they reach out and need help from the security team. And so we've had very good success with that, with getting out of our office and going and visiting these locations and talking to people about what we're doing. And so what we try to do is share with them current things we're working on, any solutions we're working on, and ask them if they have any questions or concerns. And we've had great success with that as well. And so I think anytime you can get in front of the customer and talk to them and meet them physically, it's always a good thing.
Tamer, any comment on that? Any thought?
yeah, I think that's great. That's obviously something that putting a face to the name, I think, helps tremendously. I mean, again, brilliant. If you're keeping people cyber aware by constantly touching them, that's what's going to help. Because as you said earlier, Anthony, as everybody's been mentioning, you can have the best cyber program running on the market, but you just can't. It won't mean anything if your constituents, if your customers are all poor with their cyber hygiene themselves. So it's great.
Well, every single employee is part of the security team.
Steve, anything comment there?
I fully agree with all of it. It is a team effort, and the team's made up of everyone in the organization fighting the battle, as I see it. And so we're all, we all have a critical part in that, no matter what your role is in the organization. So.
Well, they also say a team is only as strong as its weakest link. So,
true statement.
John, we all like to be happy and loving in healthcare and hug and hold hands. Does that ever end with someone who has continually shown that they cannot follow proper cyber hygiene? I mean, do we get to the point where people need to part company at some point?
I think that, I think everybody comes to work to do a good job. Everyone comes to work to be successful. And so often when people are being unsuccessful, there's a reason for that, we work with the manager or work with HR on and try to figure out a solution for that. And, I'm not going to pretend like everything's butterflies and rainbows, but, majority of people want to be successful. And so we just have to help them figure out, how to overcome that.
Steve, I know everything in your world is butterflies and rainbows.
It's all a matter of perspective, right?
Well, where do you come down on it? I mean, do you have a point at which you say, hey, I just can't have this risk exposure anymore?
Well, that's an interesting way of saying it, because I right or wrong, I don't come down on it. I see that as a business decision. I provide the data, I provide the advice, but how the organization manages their people, that's other than my own group, that's not my call.
Mhm.
I will say our organization is getting tired of repeat offenders. We do a
Mhm.
lot of friendly phishing, but I'm not leading the charge on that. I'm just providing the data.
Makes
And
sense.
so that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Tamer, any thoughts around that?
Uh, No, I think Steve's spot on that one,
Yeah.
but I did want to pivot it slightly to more, instead of talking all the customers or everybody in the organization, I do want to get an understanding a little bit of what I talked about earlier, which is this convergence of the IT and security teams and the biomed clinical teams. If you can describe what that looks like in your organizations for me, in the sense that, are you guys converging? I've seen some organizations actually converge the organizations where they do report in that way now, and other organizations where it's the biomed clinical teams are doing their own security, but they're at least being enforced. And other times it's where the security team is now taking on security for that. So can you describe where you're at, what you've seen but with your peers in that sense, in this convergence notion?
John, let's start with you.
Sure. We have a great relationship with our biomed department. They're not part of our, UT Medical Center, but we work very closely with them. And as we've been through our journey looking at IoT management, they've been part of that decision. I want their input, and I want to work closely with them in the future. That's one thing that the CIO Microsoft that I report to encourages is, going back to the previous topic about, coming down on people that make mistakes. We need to focus on the positive things and not, I think, focus on somebody who is the offender. If people react differently to things like that, and I think that if you promote the positive and show recognition when people are successful, people are envious of that a little bit and they want to strive for that. And so they're going to step their game up. And so, but tying this back to the biomed department, we want to have a good relationship with our biomed crew and work closely with them because we're in the same building. We work together and we work on the same, solutions here. We work on the same pieces of gear, and so it's real important to have that good relationship with our counterparts and work closer with them and include them in on as much as we can.
Steve?
Yeah, we do it. We're all separate from the standpoint of cybersecurity and information security at Geisinger is a department that's separate from IT and clinical engineering. And there's no real interest in consolidating those groups. One of the reasons is from a security standpoint, my department's responsible for enterprise, but we are expected and should be expected to collaborate and work together with our cohorts to implement security. Yes, it does lead to some contention sometimes, but I'll argue it's healthy. We also, as a group, laugh. Sometimes we're like families. Sometimes we fight. Sometimes we're all in it together. It's a pretty solid relationship. But my stance is I think it's critical that you do have some separation there so that you can, you get different forces to weigh into the final decision.
All right. Very good. Let's go get our lightning round of final thoughts. Um, John, let's start with you. Your final advice to picture a CISO colleague on the line today, struggling a little bit with some of the things we've talked about. What's your final parting piece of advice?
I would say you take one step at a time, go slow, and spend your time ingesting the solutions and working with the proof of concepts to make sure these solutions are best for you. Work within the constraints you have.
All right, Steve.
Yeah, along the same lines, agree with John. It's a journey. And that's how you have to view it. To his point, we call it crawl, walk, run as we approach things. And that's the way we do it. You get ahead not by trying to take it on all at once, but continuing to work away at it and carve it out to what you want.
Very good, Tamer.
For me, I think the step one has always got to be a complete visibility of it all, though, because any plans that you're going to make, any security, any policies, anything that you're trying to do, if you don't have that complete picture across the entire enterprise, you're already behind. I mean, that's got to be the foundational step one. But second to that is anything that you are looking to do has to be more than another dashboard and widget. You have to have something that's going to be actionable, automated, and actually do work for you as well, because we don't have the time or manpower or human capital to do it all. So that's the two biggest things that I would offer as advice here to look into.
All right. Well, that's about all we had time for today. Regarding continuing education, you can use the final slide in this deck. You'll receive an email when the on-demand recording of this event is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to register for upcoming webinars. With that, I want to thank our tremendous panel, Steve Dunkle, John Jeffries, and Tamer Baker. I want to thank Forescout for sponsoring today and our attendees for joining. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.